slight progress in with a change of it.
He used to meet me on the east side, in the city where the sun don't set. And every day, you know where we ride through the back streets in a blue Corvette. And baby, you know I just wanna leave tonight. We can go anywhere we want, drive down to the coast, jump in the sea. Just take my hand and come with me, singing. We can do anything if we put our mind to it. Take your whole life and you put a line through it. Love is yours if you're willing to take it. Give me your heart, cause I ain't gonna break it. So come away, starting to take, start a new life together in a different place. Know the love is how all these ideas came to be. So baby, run away with me. Run away now, run away now, run away now. Run away now, run away now, run away now. He used to meet me on the east side. She used to meet me on the east side. He used to meet me on the east side. She used to meet me on the east side, in the city where the sun don't set.
The Arizona sky burning in your eyes. You look at me and babe, I wanna catch on fire. It's buried in my soul, like California gold. You found a light in me that I couldn't find. So when I'm all choked up, but I can't find the words. Every time we say goodbye, baby, it hurts. When the sun goes down and the band won't play, I'll always remember us this way. Oh yeah, I wanna be just a memory, baby. Ooh, ooh, oh, 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 oh. When I'm all choked up, but I can't find the words. Every time we say goodbye, baby, it hurts. And when the sun goes down and the band won't play, I'll always remember us this way. When you look at me and the whole world fades,
Hello. If people want to take their seats, we're about to kick off.
Yeah.
Welcome, welcome. My name is Harry Portapinna. I'm the director of IPPR. I'm delighted you've all chosen to join us on this sunny evening in Liverpool. We're here for a panel with a slight difference. Every year we do the big ideas debate, and rather than just sit here and we pontificate, we are instead going to do a bit of a competition. And so the idea is that we have several judges on my left, your right, and we have several contestants pitching their ideas on my right, your left. And we'll also get a chance to hear your pitches as well if you're up for it. So today's topic, today's theme is insurgent government. So across the world, what we're seeing is mainstream parties struggling against the populist right and voters rejecting mainstream politics. And the response, or one of the ideas that was put forward by Morgan McSweeney, the Chief of Staff to Keir Starmer, was this idea of insurgent government. And a bit like Brexit means Brexit, or levelling up, or the burning injustices, no one quite knows what it means. And so we have taken it upon ourselves to define it, and we published a paper this week that tried to do just that. And I'm not going to summarize the whole paper, but there were three shifts that we said mainstream parties like the Labour government need to make if they're going to be insurgent. The first is to be radical and not incremental. The second is to be emotive, not just technocratic. And the third is to pick sides. Whose side are they on, not just claim to represent everybody all the time. So there's a kind of high-level theme that we will be kind of thinking about when we hear your ideas. And we're going to hear from each of our contestants in turn, who will speak for, let me check how long you've been told so that we're all on the same page. So you've got 3 to 4 minutes on your pitch. We will then have 5 minutes of judges' reflections, high level, and then we'll have 1 or 2 thoughts from the audience, and then we'll do the next person, and then the next person, and then we will make some decisions. So I'm here to welcome everyone on the panel. So we have, on the presenter side, Professor Jane Gingrich in the middle, Professor of Social Policy at the University of Oxford, also an Associate Fellow of IPPR. We have Matthew McGregor, Chief Executive of 38 Degrees, also a trustee of IPPR, theme going on.
It's a stitch-up.
Indeed, yeah. IPPR win, whatever happens, IPPR wins, basically. Unless, of course, it's Dr. Sasha Hillhorse, who's postdoctoral research fellow at London School of Economics. It's not stacked against you, don't worry. And in terms of judges, I have Stephen Bush, Associate Editor and columnist at the Financial Times. I have Zoe Bellingham, Director of IPPR North. And I have Polly Mackenzie, formerly of the Liberal Democrats. We have a diverse panel here. And at UAL, or you finished now. Where are you now, Polly? I should know this.
I'm at large.
You're at large. Wow. You're just you.
Dangerous.
It's a bit like
Dangerous.
Beyonce or Cher.
Yeah.
You just don't even need to say anymore. One word is enough. Fine. Great. So I am going to kick us off. I'm going to start with Jane. I hope you're expecting that, Jane. So you've got 3 to 4 minutes to pitch your insurgent idea. Over to you.
Okay. I've been told that it's a generous definition of 3 to 4 minutes.
Okay. We can negotiate.
Okay. Okay. So big problems require big solutions. Trust in UK institutions is at an all-time low. Many are sitting out politics, and the forces that question the very foundations of democracy are gaining steam. Places that have successfully rebuilt trust did not just make tweaks to institutions, but engaged in real transformation. Think of New Zealand's move to proportional representation, or Estonia's introduction of radical transparency and digital democracy. So democracy can renew itself by creating new channels of participation and trust. And so I want to propose a civic power project, a 3-pronged set of reforms that combines top-down, middle-out, and bottom-up shifts that look to build power-sharing states. So prong 1, the top-down. So first, for change to work, we need leadership at the top. So I'm going to propose something that sounds oxymoronic, which is a participation czar, but a top-level person responsible for the health of democracy itself. So the UK's used the czar model at many points for drugs, food, loneliness. Most of these have not been effective, but the ones that have worked have combined real responsibility, a clear mandate, and strong political backing. So creating a figure at the top with a budget, small team, and cross-departmental mandate to embed democratic reforms in everything from planning to health would ensure citizens are not just an afterthought, but co-decision makers. But the real task of the czar will be to make the next 2 tranches of this reform work. So the second part is the middle out. So we need to unlock innovation locally. Devolution is underway. I think that's the right thing. But participation at the local level is often extremely unequal. Turnout is low, and organized groups representing the privileged often have the space to block or dominate debates. If we give councils more responsibility without the resources to expand participation by the hard to reach, it risks frustration. But mandating participatory projects from the center can undermine local legitimacy. So the second stage of my Civic Power project addresses this through a participatory innovation fund. It's like a public venture capital for democracy. So here's how it would work. Local governments would pitch participatory ideas for hard-to-reach groups. They could be a citizens' jury, participatory budget, digital assembly, whatever. But if they were successful, they would receive funds from the center and mentoring to build out capacity. The results would remain theirs. They could scale what works, but it would come from their own initiative. And this would create a portfolio of democratic experiments. And the difference from existing innovation funds would be the scale. This would be much more money and resources for this. But it would also be that the center would not be setting priorities and local governments just be caught in a loop of grant writing. Instead, the initiatives would come for building local capacity supported by central funds. Okay, so what would that do? The third tranche is to empower citizens directly. So my last idea is the most untested, but it looks to create bottom-up change. Many people lack the time or resources to participate in public life, and this creates a negative cycle where the politicians don't reflect the people that they represent in many ways. So I propose giving citizens the entitlement to apply for what I call a civic sabbatical, a one-year paid leave, like parental leave, dedicated to public problem solving. The cost of the service would be shared, so the government would fund the leave up front, employers would guarantee people's jobs while on the leave, and citizens would contribute in the long run through a delay in access to their pension, state pension, if they took the leave. I would anticipate this would start small, maybe 10,000 participants a year, with a preference for those that were economically advantaged, so this didn't just end up being a gap year for the already privileged. Citizens could spend their civic sabbatical doing local volunteering, participating in projects seeded by the Innovation Fund, or initiatives of their own. Other countries have tried youth volunteering schemes, but this proposal dramatically extends this. It would create opportunities for people across the life cycle, inject resources into this, and create a new talent at the local level, supporting a more economically diverse set of leaders. So together, these are three levers for renewal: top-down, a participation czar; middle out, an innovation fund; and bottom-up, the civic sabbatical. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to now come to our friendly judges. Who has some questions for Jane? Who would like to go first? Polly.
So I think often in discussions like this, the concepts of participation and democracy get jumbled up in ways that are sometimes useful and sometimes a bit complicated. For example, you talked about hard-to-reach groups, but also when we think about democracy, actually what you need is sortition and a representative group, and you need the hard-to-reach people and the easy-to-reach people, and how do you balancing needs. And I wonder how, there's lots in this that I really love about mobilizing people and participation and the role of citizen that's more than just the ballot box and paying your taxes, but how do you build in some sense that democracy is also about balancing trade-offs and conflict?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. So I think there's different democratic challenges in different places. So if you think about something like housing, we know that it's a kind of a wicked problem, and that when you ask for local participation, you often get NIMBYism. And but if you have just sort of a central diktat, or you try and override local people, they feel incredibly frustrated from the process. And so the challenge is how you create a process on the ground that brings in a diverse set of interests, and not just the sort of incumbent homeowners, but you kind of, and this sounds cheesy, I know, but like you get the kind of yes, not just the no, as the outcome. And so there are places that have tried these kinds of things where you create citizens panels or other things where you sort of mandate that you come up with a solution. You can't just block things. There has to be something affirmative that comes out of it, but you include in that discussion people that aren't necessarily voting, or certainly aren't part of organized groups that have the power to block. And I think that then can feed back into what actual decision makers on the ground are doing. And the idea would be empowering local communities to introduce those kinds of democratic experiments where relevant. But doing so in a way that really resources them so that they don't just feel like cheap talk.
I instinctively absolutely love this idea, Jane. IPPR North, all about kind of community participation, representation. My question is about how this interacts with the sort of political system. And, we're doing some work at the moment in Liverpool, actually, about the representation of political leadership to make sure that political leaders themselves are representative of the communities that they're serving. So I suppose, how do we do this in a way that doesn't let off the politicians off the hook and make them think, well, we'll do business as usual, but we'll have our participation innovation fund over here, so they'll do the legwork?
Yeah, that's why it's kind of the third prong, the bottom-up part, is really critical, because I think that the challenge is that we need to create the ladders for a more diverse set of people to become politicians. And so oftentimes when we sort of layer on these participatory initiatives, it's about undercutting local government. So you either say, okay, let's get the third sector involved, let's get groups involved, and you're not building up local capacity. But you want to think about the changes where you actually say, like, no, in the long run, what's gonna work in this country is having democratically elected governments that can serve local people that are actually high capacity. And so you don't want to create participatory experiments that undermine that. You want them to be built in, and then you want the actual leaders in local government in the longer run to start to reflect a more diverse set of groups, especially economically. So I think it's about building those things together and thinking about, like, in the short run, you might have participatory experiments. In the longer run, you'd hope to have a democratic system where that's just like embedded in it more effectively.
Great, thank you.
I'm going to take one or two questions or comments from the audience on this idea before we move on to Matthew. So does anyone have a challenge, a question, an idea on this one? Stunned silence.
It's Sunday. It's Sunday.
The lady on the left, just over here, there's a microphone coming, and the gentleman just behind will take two.
Very much. Instead of having the sabbatical for a defined period of time, have you considered 4-day week or other ways that could free up time on a more recurring basis so that people could participate in an ongoing fashion?
Love it. And then the gentleman in the orange shirt, or red maybe?
I'll come round.
Pink.
Yeah, Neil, I'm chair of the LGIU. Just a question about why bother to be an elected representative if everything is going to be done away? Why not give time off mandatory to paid representatives to actually, which would empower and introduce a whole range of new people to stand? Thank you.
Great. Jane, do you want to comment on those?
Yeah, I think those are both great ideas. I mean, I think the key thing is to think about how do you take the problem that a lot of people face real barriers to participation, especially at the sort of midpoint in their careers. Like, so they've gained all this experience, they have all these things that we'd want to bring into representative government, and yet they often don't have the time or the ability to invest in the kind of training they would need to make that effective. So I think 4-day weeks, maybe expanding the resources or capacity for local governments, these are all really important things to think about, like, how do you diversify the kinds of talent that we have available, and also just give people a sense of agency over their communities and their life. Like, you can do something at a certain point, and actually we as a society and as a set of actors find that really valuable. And so I think there's no one way to do that. This was one idea, but I think these are also excellent ideas.
Amazing. Thanks, Jane. Round of applause for Jane, please.
Yeah.
Great. Matthew, I'm going to come to you now. Over to you.
Thanks, Harry, and thank you, IPPR, for organising the event. I've been a campaigner all of my life. I wasn't too daunted about talking about policy until Harry told me just before we started that the person with the best idea wins a secondment to government to oversee the implementation. So it sort of set the bar a little bit higher.
It's probably too radical for the government. Whatever you're about to say, go for it.
Your words, not mine. I do think I've got something to offer because I think we are at a moment in our politics where actions, not words, is enough. The purpose and story of the government matters too. So my policy is for the government to cut the utility bills of those hardest up, and to do that by requiring companies that provide the basic human essentials to introduce a social tariff. And further, that the government requires and enables those companies to find qualifying customers rather than expecting those customers to nominate themselves. I should say this draws on some fantastic work by Citizens Advice, IPPR, and others for an automated social tariff. Policies in themselves don't make an insurgent government. Acting like an insurgent government makes you one, with policies that prove the broader story that you are telling. So an insurgent government must do three things: to be radically, relentlessly focused on making changes that make a meaningful difference in people's lives, in their pockets, in the here and now, to take the side of ordinary people over the financial interests of companies and the lethargic hand of the state, and to be ready to engage in conflict with the forces that seek to stymie that action. So a social tariff, an affordable price for those struggling to make ends meet for the basics, and the cost of just living a little meets those tests. Firstly, why a social tariff? Households in the lowest 10% for income already spend 2/5 of their earnings after housing on water, energy, broadband, and car insurance bills. That's 41% for the lowest 10%. It's only 5% for those in the top 10%. The shock impact of sharp changes, as we've seen over the last few years, on those who already struggle to pay for the absolute basic essentials in life has a particularly regressive impact. There are some schemes like the Warm Homes discount, but they are patchy and they vary from region to region and company to company. Experts have projected that a social tariff across those delivering the essential services would save people almost £700 a year. It probably doesn't sound like a lot of money to those of us in this room, but it would be a 10% increase in the disposable income for the people impacted. So it ticks that first box of an insurgent government materially helping people to experience and feel a change in their own circumstances. But what about taking the side of ordinary people against the institutions? That's where making it mandatory for the firms to sign up those who qualify comes in. It requires a legal requirement on those companies to require them to do it, and it requires the state to act to enable the safe data sharing between government and companies to make it possible. The onus will be on the firms, and they will have to do the work. There are lots of details about how to make that happen. I don't want to hand wave and make it sound easy, but I'm conscious of the time that we have, and obviously functional, legal, and ethical hurdles to make it work. But the third point, won't companies and many in government raise concerns about this being too hard, too unfair a burden on poor corporations just trying to make a profit? And that's where that third point of an insurgent government comes in. Conflict between government and those who seek to stymie progress clarifies for people whose side you're on. Is this a Labour government on the side of the poorest in our country who have been struggling, who are time poor as well as financially poor? Or is this a government on the side of the state, the big companies, and those with the comfort of not worrying every time an energy bill hits the doormat? As FDR once said, of business, financial monopoly, speculation, reckless bankers, and class antagonism, they are unanimous in their hatred for me, and I welcome their hatred. An insurgent government should say, whether it's a state, a company, or a mixture of both, whoever can bring bills down for people who are struggling, however we can bring bills down, we will deliver it. We will do the hard yards of making people's lives better a little by little. The need for an insurgent government, a government that fights for the change people want to see, is urgent because we are in a battle for the soul of the nation. Losing that battle will not just mean a failure of progressive government, it will create the far right's best ever opportunity in our country's history.
Thank you, Matthew, and I love the Roosevelt quote, absolutely love it. So I'm going to come now to our judges. I'm going to start with you, Stephen. Do you want to pose some question or challenge to Matthew's amazing policy idea?
I worry this is going to be the world's most on-brand and cliche FT response, but I mean, what's wrong with cash transfers? Like, like it's crazy. This crazy idea you could give people £700. And then, of course, most people, even the most disadvantaged, then do spend. Yeah, cash transfers do just tend to work a bit better. And we do also have some of the highest energy costs in Europe, in part because successive governments keep ladling things onto the energy companies and then get passed on to businesses, passed on to households. We have core inflation is already, basically 2 points above target. Do we, like?
It's like Rachel Reeves is in the room with us.
I mean, if Rachel Reeves was in the room, she'd be happily ladling more. One of the reasons why the government is in a mess is you have been alarmingly casual about inflation. Like,
I want to pick a fight with Stephen because
yeah.
Our judges are now fighting, just FYI.
we do have very high energy costs. We have high energy bills, but actually energy per kilowatt hour tends to be pretty cheap in the UK. And there's a reasonable question about how much you load social costs. And, you know, for me, the challenge with this is it wouldn't actually take any money out of the profits of the corporations. It would just shift the costs of the social tariff onto everybody else's bills. But nevertheless, the problem in the UK is the rates at which we consume with our grotesquely leaky and inefficient houses, not the actual price per kilowatt hour. And so I guess my other challenge to this, because I'm pretty comfortable with the idea of socialising some of the cost into a tilted tariff, is actually about the problem is that you are shifting the incentives not to consume, when actually what we need is for the incentives to consume to be harder, you know what I mean? And actually for kind of the transition to a low carbon economy, the most important thing is for us to pay for the upfront capital transition.
Before I come back to you, I'm going to take anything that Zoe wants to add, and then we'll come back to you, Matthew, to come back on our judges.
On Friday this week, IPPR heard from Pedro Sanchez, the PM of Spain, who have managed to reduce electricity prices by 50%. And that was done through very hardcore investment in renewables. So I'm just wondering how that interacts, and maybe that speaks to some of the kind of who pays point that was raised by my fellow judges about whether that cost could be reduced as much as, or, you know, at the same time that the government then starts to subsidise effectively energy bills.
Love that, mainly for the IPR name drop. Matthew, over to you.
I mean, a lot of these sound like details that need to be worked out as I'm implementing it. Look, you know, I mean, not to be flippant, but the task we were set was to come up with one policy rather than multiple policies. And I think there is a lot to be said about cash transfers, and there is a huge amount to be said for the investment that the government is making on insulation and the requirements that are being made on new house builders. But I think one of the challenges that I've tried to meet is that so much of what this government is doing is long-term investment, which is, you know, hardly a criticism, but it is, you know, as our polling, 38 Degrees published polling today showing that in 92% of constituencies across the country, people say that they don't feel better off than they did a year ago. And that is a meaningful problem, not just from a policy perspective, which this seeks to try and solve in the short term, but it is a political problem for a country that is facing a choice between a progressive bloc of parties and a populist far-right bloc of parties. And if we don't put money in people's pockets quickly, we won't be able to turn that around. Now, cash transfers is definitely one way to do that. I think that you know, I don't want to give the impression that social tariffs should only be funded by tilting the tariffs so that better off customers are subsidising those worst off. There are other ways of doing that, including windfall taxes that are then used to subsidise customers and other ways. But you know, there are definitely things that need to be worked out in the implementation of this policy. But the reason I've chosen it is because it was one that appeals to me because it can put money in people's pockets incredibly quickly. And this is a government that desperately needs to have those kinds of policies.
Excellent. I'm going to take a couple of thoughts, questions from the audience. A gentleman at the back with his hand up. And if anyone else wants to put their hand up in the background, I'll come to you in a second.
So reflexively, I like the policy. It's retail. It actually does some good. But if I was advising the Conservative or the Reform leaders, I'd say government wants to hike working people's energy bills to give it to people on benefits and probably immigrants. You know, how do you stop the attack of this is more cost on working families for people who won't work? You know, there's such a clear line of attack on it that is it insurgent, or does it just catch people in the trap again of being against workers, against the middle, and for the very poor, which tests horribly with the British public?
Great. Lady in the back and the right. Oh, there's a microphone coming. That is true. You do. That is true.
Sure, I'll quieten it. I just wondered, as a build on that, which I suppose is a challenge as well, is, wouldn't the National Energy Guarantee work better? I would say that because I'm from the New Economics Foundation. But it eliminates a lot of the things that people are describing as a problem here by providing a foundational amount of energy to everybody. And that's your how you come back against an attack line as well. Everybody can have a foundational amount for free or low cost. And then it better incentivizes, avoids the mean testing, and better incentivizes the creation of products above that and a tapering up of costs if that's what companies want to do, but incentivizes people who can afford to retrofit their homes. So wouldn't that be a better solution?
How much does it cost? Loads, good. And then there was a lady in the front and then I'll come back to the panel. Love it, never the slide. We didn't cost it, it's loads of money.
I was literally going to ask the same question. I was going to make the same point.
Okay, great, a consensus. Matthew,
Yeah, I mean, well, it sounds like we're already starting the pitches from the audience, and I don't know I don't know that policy, but it does sound like a good one. Look, I think the policy point I would say is I've seen ways in which a social tariff can be implemented that doesn't solely rest on the company cross-subsidizing within its customer base. There are ways of trying to force companies to take the cost, to bear the cost out of their profit margin rather than onto other customers. But I think there's a broader point about the attack line, which is whether this policy is the strongest one or there are others that deliver the same thing in different ways. This is a government that has to fight for the values it has and to articulate a story about what it is trying to do, because arguing the ins and outs of the intricacies of different policies only gets you so far. People in the country do not understand the things that the government is trying to do and how they add up. The polling I mentioned earlier, we polled 12 of the government's policies. 9 of them are very popular. 1 of them is neither here nor there, and 2 of them are really unpopular. You wouldn't get that from the state of the polls or the state of discourse in this country, because the government doesn't have a story that ties those things together and isn't willing to fight for those policies on a values basis. So not to go around the particular question you were asking about my specific policy, there's a broader point about insurgent government relying on the government fighting for the values it has.
Fantastic. Give Matthew a round of applause, please. Great. And our final pitch from the panel, I am going to come to the audience. If someone wants to make their own pitch, I'm going to come to 1 or 2 people for a 1-2 minute pitch. So if you've got an idea, now's your moment. But I'm going to come to Sasha first. So Sasha, you've got about 4 minutes. Over to you.
Perfect. So back in 2017, a think tank you might have heard of called IPPR diagnosed that Labour had what they called a Mansfield problem. And for those of you who are not as familiar, Mansfield is a working class town in Nottinghamshire, largely white, history of mining and manufacturing. And it's often seen as being emblematic, right, of these places where Labour has struggled. Increasingly, people have turned away from the party and quite often turned away from politics altogether. And by current polls, that's still true. It seems like by some models, Reform would get as much as 48% of the vote if an election were held now. And obviously take that with a pinch of salt, but that gives you a sense of the direction of travel. I'm an ethnographer. I lived and worked in Mansfield, spoke to lots of people. And it is true that the tenor of politics in Mansfield is very cynical, very declinist. And in part, that is about the fact that deindustrialization didn't just cut people's incomes, it also led to a loss of opportunity. It's a social mobility cold spot, a loss of shared spaces, so that's the loss of your welfare, the town centre has been declining, and a loss of amenities and care. The factories and the pits often had a pit nurse where you would go to get patched up rather than going to the hospital. And that's all gone. And that has put people in this mood that was expressed so strongly and is still expressed very strongly, that everything just keeps getting worse. And that is a death zone for progressive politics. But what if there were policy ideas, big, bold policy ideas, that we could develop that tackle all of those things at once. The loss of opportunity, the loss of conviviality, the loss of access to care. In particular, I really, really believe that as progressives, we should look at these underused and declining town centres, not primarily as a political headache, but as a site of possibility, which can be reimagined and remade democratically. And we should ask ourselves, what are the social needs we would like these places to meet? And so thinking of a place like Mansfield, but also the country as a whole, one of the things we really need is education, particularly training places for nurses. Bear with me now, but we need a massive expansion of the nursing workforce. NHS England itself, and this is, I'm using the figures for England here, but this is true across the UK, says training places will have to almost double in the next few years because we just need a ton of nurses. It's a huge bottleneck on the NHS. And at the moment, the figures are going the wrong way, in part because back in 2017, the nursing bursary for training was abolished, so lots of people can't afford to train up. So what we need is, one, to reinstate the bursary, two, to build new nursing training colleges. And in particular, so NHS England calculated that we would need 24,000 additional yearly places for nursing education. That could translate into 50 nursing colleges with 500 yearly places each. We could, through partnerships with regional universities, place them in towns that have less provision, that don't have a university, that have less post-16 offerings. And then point three, and this is really important, we want that to be in the town centre. You don't want it to be on a cheap stretch of land along the motorway. You want it to be dead in the centre. Mansfield's FE College is currently, out of town, on the way out of town. And instead, you want to be taking these iconic buildings that these towns all have, your old post office, civic buildings, iconic department stores, and taking them into public ownership and tooling them out to be sites of education. And you'd have these hundreds of trainee nurses flooding into the town centre, bringing life back in, and changing this sense that actually, things don't have to always get worse. Things can get better. We can bring the buzz, the life back in. And so you provide opportunity, you save the town centre, and you resolve this huge problem for the NHS. Obviously, this costs money. I think we should pay for it by making landlords and investors pay national insurance. They won't like that. They will shout about it. But I think that's okay. You've got people who would lose out from it, who would have to pay more tax. And on the other side, you've got nurses who would benefit, provincial towns that would benefit, your Mansfield, your Telford, your Rochdale. And you've got everybody who depends on the NHS who would benefit from it. And insurgent government is about making those tough decisions. It is, about these central questions of politics, going back to this phrase that has been mentioned a few times now from an old mining song. This policy would allow the government to clarify which side are you on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sasha. So over to our judges. Who wants to come in first?
Happy to go. No, I love this idea, Sasha, especially if it's targeted at places that, as you say, both have high NHS need and kind of lower opportunity than other places. So I think the targeting is a really important part of your idea. And I love how it's kind of also brought in the sort of town centre and the challenges to town centre. I guess a slightly sort of political question here, which is like, does this let the government off the hook on the sort of migration story about the extent to which we actually bring in healthcare workers from abroad? And does it let them off the hook there by saying, don't worry, we can train our own, so we don't need people from abroad, when we know we will always need talented people from abroad coming in? So that's my kind of political framing question for you, but I love the idea.
I'm going to take a couple.
Of course, yeah.
Polly or Stephen, you want to come in?
I mean, I guess why nurses specifically? I mean, clearly there's a training need. But if you're thinking about revivifying a town centre, actually, most FE colleges, most university colleges are actually pretty impenetrable. yes, people will come out and they'll get their sandwich, but they'll also go back in again. I just wonder if this is the way to create kind of permeable and lively experiences for the people who aren't those 500, because I don't know the population of Mansfield, but I wonder if you might be kind of over-indexing on what 500 individuals and the requisite staff to train them could really do.
Stephen, anything from you before we go back to Sasha?
I really like this as an idea. I just have a question about the amount it would cost and how you're planning to fund it, because obviously you're only, I mean, slightly bizarrely, you're only allowed to not pay national insurance on as a landlord if it's not your main job. The policy logic of the Renters' Right Bill is that amateur landlords are all going to hopefully be flushed out of the market. So aren't you proposing to fund this with a revenue base that government policy is consciously, and I think rightly, trying to get out of the system anyway?
Some great questions.
Great question. Yeah, we definitely always need immigrant staff in the NHS as well. We've also been doing some pretty unethical stuff in terms of bringing nurses in from countries that are red listed. So training up more people in the UK is only a good thing. And we also just need so many people. So definitely not an either or. In terms of would this be enough, how much would this actually do? I think, yeah, I envision this as a part of a whole suite of policies. But first of all, you need people in the town centre. And I wish I could sort of take you there because you would feel it. You walk around there and it doesn't feel nice. And everybody will tell you that it doesn't feel nice, which is a huge contrast from like 20, 30 years ago. And so first and foremost, you just need a little bit of footfall. And if that's for now, just trainee nurses, arriving, walking in, maybe getting a sandwich, leaving again, that already would be absolutely transformative. Maybe getting a drink at the pub afterwards, just so it doesn't feel as sad. Because everything the government's doing on high streets right now is premised on the idea that you would go there, that some people would go there. In terms of the money, how much it would cost, I've done some back-of-the-envelope costings. Obviously, we imagine that ultimately it would save money in terms of cutting waiting lists and whatnot. But yes, what if we see sort of the euthanasia of the rentier, or like the amateur landlord? There's other ways that you can shift it around.
What about an online retail tax to fund this high street? They're not going out of business, are they?
What?
The online retailers.
No, they are. Amazon is always with us.
What about, are you, just a quick one and then I'm going to open to the audience. Are you hopeful about the government's Pride in Place, 3.5 billion going into high streets and communities? How do you feel about that? Is that going to help?
I definitely want to be nice about it because some of this money is going to Mansfield, which is a place I care about deeply.
Great.
But you need anchor institutions, and in lots of places that's universities. But what do we do for places that don't have that?
Okay, any questions from our audience for Sasha? Who would like to come in? Marcus, there's a microphone coming.
Thanks so much. Anything that can be done to rejuvenate our town centres is to be welcomed, but town centres aren't just about places of education or training, they're also places about earning as well as belonging. And so my question here is, how do we regenerate for earning as well as belonging? How do we have town centres that have a purpose for our economy locally and attract people there? And I'm worried that if we just concede and condemn our town centres to just being places where kids go to learn things, all we'll get is children there learning things, and we won't actually have multiple generations all sharing shared spaces and sharing their stories with each other in something that produces value and growth for the society and the community more generally.
Great question. Anyone else want to come in? The lady at the back.
Hi, I'm Erin from the Women's Budget Group, and I love this idea. I'm just interested in what you think the gendered implications are, because obviously the majority of the health service is staffed by women, and yeah, they have families, and lots of the stories we hear about the kinds of places you're talking about are, you know, the ends of kind of traditional men's jobs. So yeah, just interested in what you think the implications are.
Definitely. I think if initially these town centres just become vibrant with young people learning, that'll also be really good for businesses, because nobody benefits if people just don't want to be there. And you can ask the council and any number of councils who've put in so many programs for entrepreneurship and whatnot, and have tried to make shops available and whatnot, and people have just not been interested because there's nobody there. So I do think this emphasis on learning should be great for a lot of the businesses there, and should hopefully help people take some of these empty and abandoned shops and give them the faith that if they invest their time and their money into making something nice out of it, there will be people there who will take advantage. The gendered implications, yeah, definitely. Though in defense of the policy, the whole thing about the nursing bursary came out of conversations I had with ex-minors, with men, who complained that their daughters weren't able to train up in the way that they had. So I'm not an expert in nursing policy, but I came to this idea by speaking to men, and this was the thing that had made them feel more cynical about the trajectory of the country. Certainly gendered implications, I think to some extent may be a helpful corrective, because when people talk about Mansfield, they really do very often talk about the men who lost their jobs in the deindustrialization, whereas actually the textile factories shut in the 90s and 2000s, and that was all women's jobs, and we haven't paid as much attention to that.
Fantastic. Well, a round of applause for Sasha.
Yeah.
Now, the moment of truth. Is there any audience member brave enough to pitch their own idea? Who has an idea they would like to pitch for insurgent government? Gentleman at the back, very brave, well done.
Thank you. My name is
2
Ben
minutes.
Toomey. I'm the Chief Executive of Generation Rent, so we stand up for renters across the UK. It's building on the point about the Renters' Rights Bill. We saw a boom in landlordism over the last 25 years, particularly after 2000. In about 15 years, we doubled the number of landlords. Has it helped renters? I mean, you can see what's happening with the Renters' Rights Bill and the affordability crisis we're in. So I think the government would do better to say that we need more homes, yes, but we don't need more landlords. And the policy prescription for dealing with that is the buy-to-let interest-only mortgages that landlords can access. Basically sets them a massive advantage compared to first-time buyers. They're at the front of the queue because they've got more wealth than us in the first place. They only have to pay the interest on the mortgage rather than paying off the mortgage, and they don't have to prove their income. They just have to prove that they can get enough rental income on that property to be able to pay it off. So if you end buy-to-let interest-only mortgages, if you stop offering those to landlords, then it would start to reduce the number of landlords that are basically cannibalizing all of the new homes that we're supposed to be sharing among society. And it stops those people that have the least assets and the least wealth passing what little they have to those with the most assets and the most wealth. Thank you.
Amazing. Do our judges have any questions on that amazing idea?
I mean, the good but also bad news is that the buy-to-let interest-only mortgage is kind of being phased out by the terrible underlying economic situation.
Deliberate.
Yeah, I mean,
deliberate choice.
I mean, and it's like, yeah, that is why, if you actually look at property prices in the last year, one of the reasons why they are falling, and indeed this is obviously good for people. Yeah, the number of it is a net social good for people to be able to stop renting to an often small amateur landlord and have their own space. But broadly speaking, one of the manifestations of that being a good thing is that when a house stops being available for rent, the number of people living in it goes down, because the average person does not want to sleep in their kitchen. So it's good. But this is one of the reasons why actually, like, it's really important that the government is building more social housing, because there's not a painless way to reduce the number of landlords. That doesn't reduce the number of dwellings, because when we choose how we live, whether it's in a social let or a home we own ourselves, we do want more room. So this mortgage is kind of dying off anyway, just because, yeah, interest rates are going to do their thing.
Any comeback? Or are you happy with that?
I guess there's no guarantee that interest rates continue to be a nightmare, so it's trying to future-proof to stop this. Whenever conditions are right, the conditions shouldn't be right for landlords to then take over as many homes as possible.
Does anyone else want to pitch their idea? Gentleman at the front, and I've got two. Great, this is great. So first the gentleman in the blue, and then the lady in the front in the jacket.
Thanks very much. My name's Duncan. Lots of great suggestions, but the thing is, car insurance is a bloody rip-off. And it is, right? And all these companies pretend that it's a competitive market, all these brokerages, but it isn't. There are two reasons why it isn't. One is because there are very few large underwriters behind all of these policies, and the other is because the government makes us buy car insurance. If you're not allowed, I know some people do, but you're not allowed to drive without car insurance. So both of these things distort the market, and the government needs to show that it's on the ordinary motorist side. So I think that they should threaten the industry that they will enter with a no-frills, third-party, low-mileage, for people with good eyesight policy, unless they start bringing down insurance premiums. And I think that kind of gesture from a progressive left government might just persuade people that it was on their side.
So Duncan works for Transparency International, and I thought he was going to propose something like taking on some oligarchs, but no, car insurance is a rip-off, people.
It is a rip-off.
Can we take down some oligarchs as well?
Someone told me that various spads in government had hit the age where they were buying their houses, and suddenly there was this kind of spad rebellion against solicitors because they'd all experienced the trauma of trying to buy your own house. But I think
luckily, they're a bit older than having just learnt how to drive.
That's true.
Yeah.
That is true. Does anyone have questions for Duncan?
So I think one of the things that's challenging about insurance is that it is such a personalised market, right? And as the data gets better and analysis gets better, and it's more and more personalised pricing. And again, the whole point of insurance is actually to socialise risk. And we were talking about this in the context of energy bills, is that, of course, the people who are going to benefit from a lower cost from a socialised risk, high-risk people, really want socialised risk. But I think increasingly the tolerance for the fact that a sensible female old lady driver might have to subsidise young Stephen's reckless driving.
I mean, I don't have a driving licence, so...
It's probably for the best.
Extremely high risk, extremely,
right?
Very
reckless driving.
There's something about how, because the technologies enable us to personalise more and more and more, is it's eaten away at the kind of solidaristic concept of insurance. And so anyway, I don't know. I sort of want to just abolish all this personalised club card sponsored bullshit pricing and say, no, God damn it, everyone should pay the same for everything.
This is insurgent. I like it. Were you coming back, gentlemen? Okay, I'm going to come to you after. I've got so many ideas, guys. The lady in the front.
Hi, this one is. My name is Polly. So another Polly. There's not enough around. This is completely unthought through, completely unrealistic, possibly insurgent, possibly insane. But there is something around the massive transfer of wealth that many people of my age will be enjoying, expecting, or have enjoyed in the coming decade, and how we do that in a way that that is realistic and doesn't scare the horses when we start talking about inheritance tax and everyone freaks out, even though most people aren't eligible for it. So I thought, I'm not a policy maker, I am a local councillor, so I have lots of thoughts on what you were saying earlier that are really interesting. But the thing that I thought was like, how do we create something human in this? Because there's this weird thing that you go, my children are somehow entitled to have the wealth that I've accrued in my lifetime, right? So that's a really fundamental expectation that people have, and it really, really, really makes people, people feel it really, really strongly in their guts. So like, how about if we all had to, not literally, but like either metaphorically or we had to kind of adopt someone. And so if we had 3 children, we'd have to have another person that was going to inherit a quarter of our wealth. Now, like we could form a relationship with them. We could not. They would ideally be from someone from a completely different background. But that seems to me like kind of like fun, but also I don't know, it would like force people out of there, like my people are better than the rest of you people. And we might distribute some wealth, so voila.
I like this. As long as Richard Branson is the one to adopt me, it's all good. Any questions from the panel?
Sorry, I'm hogging it, but I really love this. So I used to run Demos. Sorry, IPPR.
No,
Obviously,
I should have said that at the start as
No,
well.
it's fine.
I butchered your introduction.
We did. It kicked off just as I was leaving, really, but like some really detailed work on this, challenging this inheritance tax thing, because again, it's both true and even more true in the mindset of political leaders that that inheritance tax is really unpopular and mustn't do it. But we have this structural problem of like £1 trillion of asset. What are we going to do? And I don't know about the specific design of what you're proposing, but
clearly doesn't have one yet.
I like it, but what the research discovered is that what you've got to do is exactly that, is you've got to go with something that feels like an emotional story and that retains the control of the, I don't know what's the legal word for a person marketing a will, you know, like the donor, essentially. Like that sense that I think sometimes the left wants to homogenise, that everything must go in a giant pot and be spread out equally. And unless it's that, it's not perfect, it's not pure, and therefore it's bad.
Though, interestingly, in France, who, despite what members of the Party of European Socialists sometimes imply when they're doing joint trips, is actually, let's not forget, the least successful centre-left party in Western Europe. In France, you have to give it to all your children. You aren't allowed to do sort of like weird game playing. It gets split into chunks for you. And so you then would very naturally be able to add. I mean, you're obviously absolutely right, and this is a huge living problem.
Add a favourite nephew.
Now, you're obviously right, it's a huge living problem. I think the one downside with your proposal is that I am really intrigued as to what it's going to do to people's politics and because people kid themselves that their own wealth is their luck all the time, is their hard work all the time. But we are about to fundamentally reorder wealth in this country based on whether or not you have the good fortune for your grandparents or parents to die cheaply. And that would be really bad for lots of reasons. But aren't all of you a little bit curious as to what the political consequences of that happening in an uncontrolled way would be? I mean, I want one country to not do anything about it, just so we can like find out what because it will be bad.
We're not doing anything about it at the moment.
Yeah, but I live here. I'd like.
I think it's
I prefer it when France does things which are disastrous, because it's a country I know well enough that I can understand what's going wrong
and watch from the side
and be like, oh, that's interesting. Whereas when it's here, it's that's a bit alarming.
Can I build on the idea, actually? Okay. If you're going to adopt someone, it's got to be from a different part of the country, because wealth inequality is not only the issue of our time, but it's also massively regionally unequal. You know, we build our wealth through pensions and property. Pensions linked to your income, still very regionally unequal, and house prices still very regionally unequal. So therefore, I think there has to be a geographical bent to your idea
and
too.
it could be really nice. It could be a way of like just meeting people who aren't just like you. You know, it could be great.
But even so, David Halpin once did some distribution analysis and suggested that even if you just give it all to your great-grandchildren through the mechanism of a family trust, it actually ends up much more social mobility inducing, because once you're at 3 generations, though there's still a link in family wealth, it's less. You're more likely to have had I don't know, I was about to say something rude. Like, you know, like in Succession or whatever, there's always one feckless child.
A final pitch of the evening. The gentleman, yeah.
I'm going to go back to something which is far more mundane.
What's your name first?
Neil. I'm Neil Nerva from Council in Brent. Yeah. Serious point. I'm over 60 now. So I've got access to a national rail card again. I last had one when I was a student. If I was together with somebody, 2 together, I'd be able to get a rail card. If I had a disability, I could get a rail card. If I was in the armed forces, I could get a rail card. But heaven forbid you are between your 20s and 60, you get no reduction on the rail system. You don't get reductions on coaches either. If you look at virtually every other European system, in Germany you can with bun cards at 25% off or 50% off, depending on what you decide how much to put up front in the beginning. And we could link it also to coaches, because trains unfortunately don't go everywhere, we know, yeah. And that would actually reach a whole load of, it would actually encourage rail travel. And secondly, it would actually reach, crucially, a demographic which I think feels it's left out of some of the benefits which a Labour government is delivering. So introduce a rail card where you don't have to be a specific age, but just everyone can buy into. Thank you.
Can I come back on this?
Go on,
Because, well, headline, I totally agree, rail should be cheaper. Great. Second, underneath that, your question clearly shows that you don't live in the southeast of England, because there is a network rail card. You left that out, but that makes me furious about the north, because why do you get a random third off your prices if you've got a network rail card that doesn't apply in the rest of the country?
Do you want to know why?
Yeah, go on.
Because in 1985, British Rail would... No, there's some lessons for the new government, for us. In 1985, they introduced sectorisation of British Rail, and it moved from regions to sectors. There was an innovative, whatever he was, managing director, fat controller, so to put it, of Network South Rail, Chris Green, brilliant guy, innovator, and he took it upon himself to introduce a Network South East card. Because there was no Network North at the time, and it was called, wait for it, provincial trains. And it was set in, and when they flogged the railways off and everything, it was actually written in, they could not get rid of the Network South East card. So we're dealing with sort of grandparent history.
Yeah, that needs tidying up.
It could easily be tidied up. And it's just waiting. And we were talking about it.
Internet.
Thank you.
That's the idea. That's it. Down with network rail cards.
So,
or for the whole country.
Well, it's another area where this question, like, what's the political tolerance of socialising subsidies for poor people? So, like, we single out some groups of people who ought to pay less, and as a result, the price for a normal ticket is higher. Is it better to do that, to take real action over pricing, or is it better to just say everyone is equal? I feel like we've somehow gone a bit mad.
I'm going to bring the audience, before I lose complete control of this panel, and we've gone to like wealth taxes and we're subsidising everything. Rachel Reeves is crying in the corner. So I'm going to bring us to a close, but we need to make some decisions. So what we're going to do is our panel are going to vote first on which of our presenters they're going to go for, and then we're also going to vote on our audience members. The first gentleman from Generation Rent, what's your name? Ben, right. That's the only one I didn't write down. So, okay. Are you ready to vote, people? Okay, so reminder, we had Jane with a participatory civic power package. We had Matthew with a social tariff to tackle the cost of living crisis, and a Roosevelt quote that I liked. And we had Sasha with a proposal to bring retraining of nurses to the high street in towns that have been under siege in the last few decades. So, Polly, where does your vote go?
It's not corruption, because Sasha used to work for me. But Sasha.
Okay, one vote for Sasha. It's so exciting, isn't it? You need a drum roll. You don't have a drum roll. Zoe, who are you going to vote for?
For me, it's the picture who spoke to the issue of our time that needs to be addressed to defeat the far right and show government can be powerful, and that is the cost of living intervention from Matthew.
Matthew. Stephen.
I like education spending, and I and I like anchor institutions, so I'm voting for Sasha.
Oh, it's a split vote.
Congratulations. You don't win anything, I'm sorry. I've got nothing for you, and Matthew was lying about the secondment.
Joking rather than lying.
Joking. Audience members, I'm now going to ask you which ones you would vote for, and I'm going to ask you to clap for the one that you want. So we'll have the loudest clap judgment for these three as well. So if you want to vote for Matthew's cost of living social tariff, please clap now. Good, okay, great. If you want to vote for some participatory democracy, please clap now. And if you want your high streets rejuvenated, please clap now. There is a consensus, Sasha. And we now have 4 audience members who put forward their ideas. So we've got Ben with abolishing buy-to-let mortgages. We have Duncan with state-owned car insurance company. We have Polly with your donate your wealth to some randomers. And you have, who's my final one? Neil. Who have I got? Neil
National
with...
Rail Card. Abolish network rail card.
Abolish network rail card. So, panelist Polly, who are you going for?
I'm a housing person more than anything, so I'm going with Generation Rent's proposal.
1 for Ben. Zoe?
Look, I am drawn to the rail, but actually I think inheritance is the issue of our time and wealth transfers, so I'll go with that.
And Stephen?
I also have to go for the inheritance one because it's one of the big issues of time, but also I'm rereading all of Austen at the moment, and there is some wonderful Austenian potential in the random relative. So yeah.
Excellent. And now our audience get to vote. So who is going for the buy-to-let mortgages? Clap now. Okay. Solid, solid. Who wants a state-owned car insurance company?
More than expected.
Some people. Who wants to donate their wealth to a randomer? And final one, sorry, remind me.
Rail cards.
Rail cards. Sorry, I just keep forgetting the rail card. Please.
How can you?
Who wants to have a national rail card for everyone? Okay, good. I think that was the wealth tax, so we'll put that one to Rachel Reeves. I want to say a huge thank you particularly to our pitches. All of them were excellent. I would vote for that manifesto in a heartbeat. I want to thank our judges for their kind, clever, and sometimes cutting judgments. And I'd like to thank all of you for participating. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.